America, how far you've come. Well, not really far at all compared to other ethnic nation states, but in comparison to what you've gone through in the last 242 years, yeah, you're doing pretty good. So I'm going to cover the birth of the United States for our July 4th Independence Day special. It's July 4th, 1776. You and the boys just got done talking about how much you hate your bosses, and you're singing that good old song.
Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more.
Oh wait, sorry. No, I mean you just signed a document listing your grievances to the King of England. You know not what you have just unleashed upon Earth. Only the single greatest military power in Earth's history. Well, in about 100 years from signing it will be. For now, you're a backwater group of colonists who just don't like having to pay taxes for the war the British just fought for you. But this is soon to be a long-lasting tradition of hating taxes, and it's going to send this fledgling nation into a trip of a lifetime. But first, the nation needs an actual government. Naturally, as the men wait for their Dear John letter to return, they have to form a government. And it was pretty terrible. It was about as effective as the Treaty of Versailles, and all decisions seemed to be made by a simple majority vote of 9 to 13. Although internal government was as effectively administrated as the Democrats and Republicans do it today, it gave the government the ability to make treaties, and boy, the US did not wait to manifest its destiny. See, the US had to deal with the most difficult issue besides the UK. No, not slavery. No, not poverty. No, not how to deal with a communist, because you don't have to deal with communists if there are no communists yet. They dealt with the single greatest threat and interest to them, and it was Ohio. At this time, Ohio was undeveloped land inhabited by local natives. They had just fought a war with the British and were siding with the French. Although it had been more than a decade, their strength was still weakened by that war. The Americans, looking to take control of the Ohio River Valley, took to strong arming the locals to trade their land for goods. Once America owned Ohio and most of the southern coastline of the Great Lakes, the Articles of Confederation, which is the document that was first established for the United States government, achieved one of its most important roles. It was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. What was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787? Well, what it did is it established 5 new states. Not only did it make these new states, but it put forward a notion that the natives actually had a claim to these lands, and that you actually had to treat these natives as nations, something the US would forget as they continue to expand westward. But it also outlawed slavery in all 5 new states. See, many forgot that the original 13 colonies had slavery because the British allowed them. Once free, they did not change, but they did follow the words of the Declaration of Independence, allowing all men to be equal, thus outlawing slavery in the newly created states. But these minor victories were overshadowed by the real downfall of the Articles of Confederation. The federal government was so weak it couldn't collect taxes. Many states had got huge debts during the war, and without a legal way to collect tax money, they had to rely solely on tariffs. This made trade a nightmare to deal with because every state had its own tariff system, and the British were a bit upset from losing the Revolutionary War. So they kind of raided our boats and closed off all ports to us. The Articles of Confederation were so decentralized that basically every state operated as its own country, just like the South wanted during the American Civil War. With no regulations, banks loaned to poor post-war farmers, and then they foreclosed on them. Notably, there was Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion was a revolt that occurred in Maine, where they seized courthouses so the state could not continue with the foreclosure of farms. This was the major sign to the population that the Articles of Confederation could not successfully manage the new nation. The biggest push was when the wealthy were afraid the government would default on their bonds. Since no taxes were coming in, they decided things need to be changed. And when you threaten the wealthy, things tend to change. The first attempts of change were in Annapolis, Maryland. They were to revise trade laws in the Article of Confederation, but only 6 delegates out of the 13 showed up, so nothing could actually be passed according to law. Thus, an official meeting was scheduled in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. But instead of revising it, they just decided to make a brand new document. Thus, the Constitution was born. When being made, many issues were easily agreed on, like we needed 3 branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. But then there were some that, well, they kind of had ideas that got shot down real quick. Like Alexander Hamilton proposed that the president and senate serve life terms. Yeah, that didn't go very well. Mainly because the goal was to create a government that, while it was relatively small as a federal government, they could still manage. But thanks for Franklin D. Roosevelt for screwing up the small federal government idea. Larger conflicts also emerged, like the debate on how states should be represented. It was a fight mainly between large population states and small population states. One suggested that the elective representation should be based on population. The other main idea was called the New Jersey Plan, and it suggested that they continue the way of the Articles of Confederation, and that every state gets a 1 vote. Obviously, being a plan called the New Jersey Plan, it never passed. Instead, we got the Great Compromise. If you know anything about early US history, you will understand why I'm tired of hearing the word compromise. The House was meant to be the purest way of becoming as close to a direct democracy as possible while still being a republic. And then the Senate was made so that it would never pass anything, or it would never get anything done that it was supposed to. It was so magnificently designed and so effective that till this day, they still cannot pass anything that needs to be passed on time. Then the first kind of real slave question emerged. No, it was not if it was immoral to have slaves. Don't be silly, it's not time for that yet. It was to be seen if slaves should be counted as a population of state. Not to vote, but just the population. That way slave states could have more representation in the House. But don't worry, they came up with another compromise. The 3/5 compromise had it that the total population of the colonists plus 3/5 of the slave population would be used to calculate the number of reps. So every slave really was only 3/5 of a person. There was also a fugitive slave law, stating any found escaped slave must be brought back to its owner, which became problematic when some states couldn't enforce their own laws. And once those laws changed to allow the freedom of slaves, then other states said, well, our property rights are being violated. And then we got a war. Besides the slave acts and that 3/5 thing, the US made a pretty good government that rivaled and surpassed others for decades. And then the 60s happened. But the Constitution is still pretty good. We have the legislative that makes the laws, the executive that either approves or vetoes them, and then the judicial who decides if they're constitutional or not. Even though the Constitution doesn't give them the power, they gave themselves that power. I'm sure it's fine. We also got federal and state laws out of this. While on paper it appears that we are almost independent countries, I'm sorry to say, Texas, you will never be separate without a major war. And the founding fathers, rich, intelligent landowners, put in laws to prevent too much government power, because they feared that the poor, uneducated citizens would elect representatives, God forbid a president, who would redistribute the wealth. Nobody would think this is a good idea. Until the Soviets. They also gave us the Electoral College. Oh, I can already hear the screams coming from UC Berkeley students now. It was meant to keep men of merit, intelligence, and success as the ones in office, not the poor who couldn't manage their own money, but they did not account for the change of time. Then we went on to gun rights. The Federalist Papers are a group of essays written by some of the founding members, and they had many ideas. One of them was incorporated to become the Second Amendment, and it's by Alexander Hamilton. And it states, if circumstances should at any time oblige the government to form an army of any magnitude, that army can never be formidable to the liberties of the people while they are a large body of citizens, little or at all, inferior to them in discipline and the use of arms, who stands ready to defend their own rights and those of their fellow citizens. This appears to me to be the only substitute that can be devised for a standing army, the best possible security against it if it should exist. Basically what he's saying is that if the US is to ever have an army, the civilian population has the right to be as adequately armed as them to combat them if they ever went rogue. So I say, since I can't afford a tank and a Predator drone, that we are entitled to the taxpayer dollars of California to buy me a drone and me a tank. All in all, the Constitution was a rough starting point for the US government. Some flaws, but some very good accomplishments that starts them down the course of history. And eventually, this would come to be where we are today. Hell, I mean 2018. So, thank you all for watching. Now I'm going to go celebrate the 4th of July the proper way by watching Team America World Police.